The Second Boer War, otherwise known as the Second Anglo-Boer War, was fought from the 11th of October 1899 until the 31st of May 1902 between the United Kingdom of Great Britain and Ireland on the one hand, and the South African Republic and the Orange Free State on the other. The British war effort was supported by troops from several regions of the British Empire, including Southern Africa, the Australian colonies, Canada, Newfoundland, British India, and New Zealand. The war ended in victory for the British and the annexation of both republics. Both would eventually be incorporated into the Union of South Africa in 1910. Name. The conflict is commonly referred to as simply the Boer War, since the First Boer War is much less well known. Boer was the common term for Afrikaans-speaking settlers in southern Africa at the time. It is also known as the South African War outside South Africa and as the Anglo-Boer War among South Africans. In Afrikaans it may be called the Anglo-Boer Oorlog, Tweed-Boer Oorlog, Tweed-Vryheidsoorlog or Engelsoorlog. Origins. The complex origins of the war resulted from more than a century of conflict between the Boers and the British Empire. But of particular immediate importance was the question as to which nation would control and benefit most from the very lucrative Witwatersrand gold mines. During the Napoleonic Wars, a British military expedition landed in the Cape Colony and defeated the defending Dutch forces at the Battle of Bleiauberg. After the war, the British formally acquired the colony, and encouraged immigration by British settlers who were largely at odds with the Dutch settlers. Many Boers who were dissatisfied with aspects of British administration, in particular with Britain's abolition of slavery on 1 December 1834, elected to migrate away from British rule in what became known as the Great Trek. The trekkers initially followed the eastern coast towards Natal and then, after Britain annexed the Natal in 1843, journeyed northwards towards the interior. There they established two independent Boer republics, the South African Republic and the Orange Free State. The British recognized the two Boer republics in 1852 and 1854, but attempted British annexation of the Transvaal in 1877 led to the First Boer War in 1880–81. After the British suffered defeats, particularly at the Battle of Majuba Hill, the independence of the two republics was restored subject to certain conditions. Relations, however, remained uneasy. In 1866 Erasmus Jacobs discovered diamonds at Kimberley, prompting a diamond rush and a massive influx of foreigners to the borders of the Orange Free State. Then in 1886, an Australian discovered gold in the Witwatersrand area of the South African Republic. Gold made the Transvaal the richest and potentially the most powerful nation in southern Africa. However, the country had neither the manpower nor the industrial base to develop the resource on its own. As a result, the Transvaal reluctantly acquiesced to the immigration of Uitlanders, mainly from Britain, who came to the Boer region in search of fortune and employment. This resulted in the number of Uitlanders in the Transvaal potentially exceeding the number of Boers, and precipitated confrontations between the earlier arrived Boer settlers and the newer, non-Boer arrivals. British expansionist ideas as well as disputes over Uitlander political and economic rights resulted in the failed Jameson Raid of 1895. Dr. Leander Starr Jameson, who led the raid, intended to encourage an uprising of the Uitlanders in Johannesburg. However, the Uitlanders did not take up arms in support, and Transvaal government forces surrounded the column and captured Jameson's men before they could reach Johannesburg. As tensions escalated, political maneuverings and negotiations attempted to reach compromise on the issues of the rights of the Uitlanders within the South African Republic, control of the gold mining industry, and the British desire to incorporate the Transvaal and the Orange Free State into a federation under British control. Given the British origins of the majority of Uitlanders and the ongoing influx of new Uitlanders into Johannesburg, The Boers recognized that granting full voting rights to the Uitlanders would eventually result in the loss of ethnic Boer control in the South African Republic. To the satisfaction of Lord Milner, British High Commissioner for South Africa, according to some biased sources. The June 1899 negotiations in Bloemfontein failed, and in September 1899 British Colonial Secretary Joseph Chamberlain demanded full voting rights and representation for the Uitlanders residing in the Transvaal. Paul Kruger, the President of the South African Republic, issued an ultimatum on 9 October 1899, giving the British government 48 hours to withdraw all their troops from the borders of both the Transvaal and the Orange Free State. Albeit Kruger had ordered commandos to the Natal border in early September, and the British only had troops in garrison towns far from the border, failing which the Transvaal, allied to the Orange Free State, would declare war on the British government. The British government rejected the South African Republic's ultimatum, resulting in the South African Republic and Orange Free State declaring war on Britain. Phases. The war had three distinct phases. In the first phase, the Boers mounted preemptive strikes into British-held territory in Natal and the Cape Colony, besieging the British garrisons of Ladysmith, Mafeking and Kimberley. The Boers then won a series of tactical victories at Colenso, Magersfontein and Spionkop. In the second phase, after the introduction of greatly increased British troop numbers under the command of Lord Roberts, the British launched another offensive in 1900 to relieve the sieges, this time achieving success. After Natal and the Cape Colony were secured, the British were able to invade the Transvaal, and the Republic's capital, Pretoria, was ultimately captured in June 1900. In the third and final phase, beginning in March 1900, the Boers launched a protracted hard-fought guerrilla war against the British forces, lasting a further 2 years, during which the Boers raided targets such as British troop columns, telegraph sites, railways and storage depots. In an effort to cut off supplies to the raiders, the British, now under the leadership of Lord Kitchener, responded with a scorched earth policy of destroying Boer farms and moving civilians into concentration camps. Some parts of the British press and British government expected the campaign to be over within months, and the protracted war gradually became less popular, especially after revelations about the conditions in the concentration camps. The Boer forces finally surrendered on Saturday 31 May 1902, with 54 of the 60 delegates from the Transvaal and Orange Free State voting to accept the terms of the peace treaty. This was known as the Treaty of Jing, and under its provisions, the two republics were absorbed into the British Empire, with the promise of self-government in the future. This promise was fulfilled with the creation of the Union of South Africa in 1910. The war had a lasting effect on the region and on British domestic politics. For Britain, the Second Boer War was the longest, the most expensive, and the bloodiest conflict between 1815 and 1914, lasting 3 months longer and resulting in higher British casualties than the Crimean War.